All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We've got a really, I think, a fascinating deep dive today for all of you SAP experts out there.
Yeah, this should be a good one.
It should be. I feel like this is something that a lot of people who work in and around SAP are thinking about these days, which is, uh, how to leverage cloud technologies,
Mhm.
specifically Google Cloud.
Right, right.
And rather than going through marketing materials or sort of like, third-party analysis, we went right to the source, right? We're using Google's own documentation.
That's right.
Yeah,
Straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
exactly. And so we're going to try to really boil down, this documentation. There's a lot there. What are the key benefits? What are the SAP certified solutions? Licensing, how do you migrate? What about compliance? How do you manage your environment? What's the support structure like? How do you actually deploy SAP on Google Cloud?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. I think it's going to be helpful to kind of, boil it down and really focus on the key elements, especially for an audience who already knows SAP pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're not here to teach people what SAP is. We're assuming that our listeners are pretty knowledgeable about that already.
Absolutely.
So let's jump in. The first thing that struck me was, when you're talking about a large enterprise system like SAP, especially if you're dealing with global deployments, the network infrastructure is so key.
Oh, it's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Google, right off the bat, they emphasize their private fiber network,
Yeah.
right? And this global reach, the security and just the scalability of this network. They're positioning it as the
Yeah.
foundation for any kind of serious SAP deployment.
And I think, what's interesting is they emphasize the security and the scalability because those are two of the biggest concerns when you're talking about moving, a mission critical system like SAP to the cloud.
Right.
And I think for, people listening who are maybe thinking about global rollouts or mergers and acquisitions, having that network that can scale and is secure is just so important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they talk about, being able to actually optimize this network,
Yeah,
right, for either performance or for cost.
that's right.
So, there are times, right, like when you're doing your month-end close where you need absolute peak performance.
Absolutely.
But then there might be other times where, things are a little bit quieter,
Yeah.
and then you can dial back the performance a little bit and save some money on your cloud costs.
Yeah, it's a really nice feature to have that flexibility.
Yeah, and then, obviously we're in this world now where everyone is trying to automate everything.
Right.
And Google talks about these tools like Terraform
Yeah.
and Cloud Deployment Manager as ways to really kind of get that process of moving to the cloud, moving at your own pace.
And I think the important thing to remember there is that, when you're talking about moving to the cloud, especially for an SAP environment, you're not just lifting and shifting, right? There's a lot of configuration and setup involved. And these tools like Terraform and Cloud Deployment Manager can really help to automate that process and make it a lot smoother.
Yeah. And for, the SAP basis people out there listening,
Mm-hmm.
this can be, it can free them up
Absolutely.
from some of the more, kind of tedious tasks and let them focus on some of the more strategic things like, actually optimizing the system, thinking about new functionalities.
Right. And also, I think we've all been in situations where manual configuration can lead to
Oh,
errors.
absolutely.
And these tools can really help to reduce that risk because, you're basically defining everything as code.
Yeah, yeah. And so then, the next thing I wanted to dig into a little bit was the architecture.
Yeah.
SAP workloads can be um, demanding on infrastructure.
Oh, they can be very demanding.
So, what does Google's virtualized architecture, how does that play into the SAP world?
Well, I think, one of the big advantages of Google Cloud's virtualized architecture is that it's very flexible, right?
Right.
So you can easily resize your virtual machines as needed. You can scale your infrastructure up or down to match the workload variations. And I think that's really important for SAP because, there might be times when you have a lot of users on the system.
Right.
You might be running a big batch job and you need a lot of resources.
Yeah.
But then there might be other times when, things are a little bit quieter
Right.
and you don't need as many resources. And so, that ability to scale up and down can really save you money because you're not, over provisioning your infrastructure.
Yeah. And I think that's a key point, right?
Yeah,
Because if you're used to the on-premise world, you buy the hardware.
exactly.
You might have to buy it for peak usage. And then the rest of the time it's sitting there,
Right.
not really doing
It's
anything.
just sitting there costing you money.
And then, also like when we're talking about demanding workloads, I mean, everyone thinks about SAP HA, right?
Yeah.
These huge in-memory databases,
Yeah.
very resource intensive.
Yes.
And so Google talks about, having these large SAP certified virtual machines.
Yeah, which is important, right? I mean, SAP certification, we're going to talk about this more, I'm sure.
Yep.
But it's not just that you can run SAP on any virtual machine.
Right.
It has to be certified by SAP to ensure that it can handle those workloads.
Right.
And so they offer these large VMs that are specifically designed for, running things like a CA.
Yeah. And then, another key aspect, right, is downtime.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, this is like the worst thing that can happen in the SAP world is your system goes down.
It's a nightmare. Yeah.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that Google is doing to kind of mitigate that?
Well, I think one of the features they talk about is compute engine live migration.
Okay.
And this is really interesting. Basically, what it allows them to do is to move a running virtual machine from one physical host to another without any interruption in service.
Wow.
So it's kind of like, if you think about, moving furniture in a house while people are still living there, we're trying to do it without disrupting anyone.
Yeah.
And so this allows them to do things like, infrastructure maintenance.
Right.
They need to upgrade a server or something like that. They can do that without actually taking your SAP system down.
Right.
And they also talk about automatic restart capabilities. So, if there is, for some reason, a failure,
Yeah.
the system can automatically restart.
Right.
So it's really about minimizing both planned and unplanned downtime.
Yeah.
Which is, again, critical for SAP.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, we've talked about the network. We've talked about, kind of the architecture and the resilience of Google Cloud. But one of the things that I think a lot of people are excited about when they think about moving to the cloud is, it's not just about running your existing systems.
Right.
It's about the potential for innovation.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that Google's talking about in terms of, really leveraging the cloud for more than just running SAP as it is?
Well, I think, one of the big things they emphasize is the integration with their other cloud services, right?
Yeah.
So, you have things like BigQuery, which is their, large-scale data warehousing and analytics platform.
Right.
And you can use that with your SAP data. They have their AI platform and machine learning services. And so
Right.
you can start to apply AI and ML to your SAP data.
Yeah.
They also talk about data integration tools. So you can connect your SAP data with other enterprise systems. And so, I think what they're really trying to do is to paint a picture of, you're not just moving SAP to the cloud.
Right.
You're actually opening up a whole new world of possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then, one of the things that I know is really important, especially for, the audience of this show, the folks who are really, in the weeds technically,
Yeah.
is certification.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? You can't just run SAP on any cloud and expect, that everything's going to work perfectly.
Right.
So the Google's really emphasizing their partnership with SAP.
Yeah.
And they're talking about, SAP certified infrastructure for a wide range of SAP solutions.
And I think it's important to emphasize that, SAP certification is not just like a rubber stamp.
Right.
It's actually a very rigorous process.
Right.
They really test the infrastructure to make sure that it meets their standards.
Yeah.
And so, it gives you that confidence that, okay, this infrastructure has been vetted by SAP.
Right.
It can run our workloads.
And they have, these lists, right, of SAP certified solutions.
Yeah, they provide links to the actual lists.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're thinking about, moving a specific SAP solution to Google Cloud, you can go to those lists and see, okay, is it certified?
Yeah.
What are the specific requirements?
And so for our listeners who want to check that out, they can look at the certifications for SAP applications on Google Cloud, which I think is one of the key ones.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then also, specifically for HANA, certifications for SAP HANA on Google Cloud, which is, kind of a more specific list.
Right, right.
So, once you've kind of gotten past that,
Yeah.
and you're thinking about, okay, I'm ready to move to the cloud.
Yeah.
One of the big things, that people always have to think about with SAP is licensing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Licensing is always a fun topic with SAP.
Licensing is always fun.
Yeah.
So, what's the approach on Google Cloud? Like, how does licensing work?
Well, the model is basically bring your own license,
Okay.
which is, what it sounds like. You bring your own
So
licenses.
you get those from SAP directly.
That's right. You get them from SAP or an authorized reseller.
Right.
Google Cloud doesn't sell you SAP licenses.
Yeah.
It's just the infrastructure.
Right. Right.
So you're responsible for procuring the licenses and making sure that you're compliant with SAP's licensing terms.
Yeah. And then, are there any kind of exceptions or programs that might be of interest, especially for non-production environments?
Yeah, they do talk about the SAP Cloud Appliance Library.
Okay.
And this is it's basically a library of pre-configured SAP systems that you can deploy on Google Cloud.
Right.
And a lot of these appliances come with free trial or developer edition licenses. So that's really helpful if you're doing, development or testing or training.
Right.
You don't necessarily need to, purchase full production licenses.
Yeah. Yeah. So, let's say, you've decided, all right, we're going to move to the cloud. We've got our licenses sorted out.
Yeah.
What does Google offer in terms of, helping to actually migrate your SAP landscape?
Well, they have this program called the Rapid Assessment and Migration Program,
Okay.
or RAMP, and it's basically designed to help customers, plan and execute their migration to Google Cloud.
Right.
And so one of the things they do is they offer a free assessment.
Okay.
And this assessment will basically, look at your existing SAP systems.
Yeah.
Things like your CPU type and core count, the amount of memory you have, what operating system you're running, the amount of storage you have.
Right.
And then they can use that information to help you estimate, how much Google Cloud infrastructure you're going to need.
Yeah. 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 That makes sense. That makes sense. And so where can our listeners find out more about this RAMP program?
We'll be sure to include a link to the Google Cloud Rapid Assessment and Migration Program page in the show notes.
Awesome. So compliance is another big area of concern, especially for SAP customers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So how does Google Cloud address those concerns?
So one of the things they talk about is this service called Assured Workloads.
Oh.
And Assured Workloads basically allows you to run your SAP workloads in a way that meets your specific compliance requirements.
Right.
So things like data residency, access control, even restrictions on support personnel.
Right.
You can define all of that with Assured Workloads. And I think the key point here is that you can get that level of control and compliance without sacrificing the benefits of the cloud.
Right.
So you're not giving up the scalability or the flexibility or the agility of the cloud.
And for our listeners who are really interested in digging into the details of that, there's a dedicated page on Google Cloud's website called Compliance and Sovereign Controls for SAP on Google Cloud.
Yeah, we'll be sure to link to that as well.
Great. So once you've migrated to the cloud, you've got your compliance squared away, how do you actually manage the environment?
So Google Cloud uses a self-service model.
Okay.
And what that means is that you, the customer, are responsible for configuring, deploying, and managing your Google Cloud infrastructure and the services that you're using.
Okay.
Now, you can choose to partner with a managed service provider if you want.
Right.
If you don't have the in-house expertise or you just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the responsibility is yours.
So if people are looking for those managed service providers, where can they find them?
So Google has this thing called the Google Cloud Partner Directory.
Okay.
And you can search for partners there. And you can filter by, different criteria.
Right.
Like, what kind of expertise they have, what industries they specialize in.
Yeah.
So you can find a partner that really meets your needs.
Okay, great. So then let's talk about support.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I mean, SAP is mission critical for most companies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So if there's a problem, you need to know that you can get support.
Right.
So how does that work on Google Cloud?
So the way it works is you can open a support ticket with either SAP support or Google Cloud Customer Care.
Okay.
And depending on the issue, the ticket will be routed accordingly.
Okay.
So, for example, if it's a problem with the Google Cloud infrastructure, then SAP support will probably direct you to Google Cloud Customer Care.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a problem with the SAP application itself, then Google Cloud Customer Care will probably direct you to SAP support.
Okay.
So it's kind of a, a joint effort there.
Right, right. And so are there any specific Google Cloud support plans that are required?
Yeah, so in order to get support from Google Cloud for your SAP deployments, you need to have either enhanced support or premium support.
Okay.
And they also mentioned that some previously accepted support plans might still be valid,
Okay.
but you definitely need to check that.
Yeah.
And it's also important to note that in order to get support from SAP, your SAP systems have to meet their certification requirements.
Right.
So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Okay. And so where can listeners find more information about all of that, all the specifics of the support?
So Google provides a couple of links. There's one called Getting Support for SAP on Google Cloud.
Okay.
And that just kind of gives you an overview of the process.
Right.
There's also a link to the Cloud Customer Care portfolio,
Right.
which, explains the different support plan options.
Yeah.
And then there's also an SAP note.
Okay.
It's SAP note 2456406, and it's called SAP on Google Cloud Platform, Support Prerequisites.
And that goes into a lot of detail about the specific requirements.
Right.
But you do need an SAP account to access that note.
Got it.
And then, of course, we already mentioned the certification pages.
Right.
So those are important as well.
So let's talk about deployment.
Okay.
How do you actually, once you've decided, okay, we're moving to Google Cloud, how do you actually get SAP up and running?
So the general process is that you first provision the Google Cloud infrastructure,
Right.
and then you install the SAP systems.
Okay.
And they talk about 4 different deployment methods.
Okay.
The first one is manual deployment.
Okay.
And this is basically where you have complete control.
Okay.
You use the Google Cloud Console, the command line interface, or the APIs to provision and configure all the infrastructure yourself.
Okay.
And then you install SAP according to the product documentation.
Okay.
So it's very flexible,
Right.
but it's also the most work. Yeah, yeah. So then for people who are looking for something that's a little more, a little less hands-on, what's the next option?
So the next option is automated deployment.
Okay.
And Google Cloud provides Terraform configuration files and Cloud Deployment Manager configuration templates that you can use to automate the provisioning of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And for SAP HANA, they can actually automate the installation of HANA itself as well.
Oh, wow.
If you provide the installation media.
Right.
So that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And then they also have this tool called Guided Deployment Automation and Workload Manager,
Okay.
which is kind of a more user-friendly way to configure and deploy SAP systems.
Right.
So it's like a wizard-driven process.
Right, right.
And the nice thing about these automated methods is that they follow SAP certification requirements and best practices.
Right. Okay. So they're not just like, some random scripts that someone put together.
No. They're actually, well tested and validated.
Right. Right. And are they flexible?
Yeah, so the configuration files and templates that they provide are basically examples.
Okay.
You can fork them and customize them to meet your specific needs.
Got it.
So you're not stuck with just what they provide.
Right. Right. And then what's the third deployment method?
The third method is the SAP Cloud Appliance Library,
Right.
which we already talked about a little bit.
Yeah.
And this is basically a way to automatically deploy various SAP solutions on Google Cloud.
Okay.
And, it's subject to SAP's licensing terms. So,
Right.
you might have trial licenses or educational licenses or developer licenses.
Okay.
But it's a really easy way to get started.
Right.
You just, choose the appliance you want and
Yeah.
click deploy.
Yeah. And then the final one is Google Cloud Marketplace.
Yeah.
Right. So Google Cloud Marketplace is basically a place where you can find, third-party offerings.
Okay.
And there are a lot of SAP-specific offerings on the marketplace. Right.
So you can find things like, pre-configured infrastructure stacks.
Yeah.
You can find, complete SAP solutions.
Yeah.
A lot of these offerings are bundled with services from the partner.
Right.
So, it's a good way to get kind of a turnkey solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. And then they have this really helpful table in the documentation that sort of summarizes all these deployment options by SAP solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, for S4HANA,
Yeah.
you can use Terraform or Deployment Manager for the VMs and storage.
Right.
You can do a manual deployment.
Yeah.
You can use the Workload Manager Guided Deployment Automation, which actually handles both the infrastructure and the S4HANA installation.
Right.
And then you can also use the SAP Cloud Appliance Library.
Yeah.
And then for other solutions like, BW4 Chana, Business Suite Akina, they all have slightly different options.
Right.
So, I would definitely encourage listeners to check out that table in the documentation.
Yeah, it's a really good reference.
Yeah, it is. It's really helpful.
Hmm.
So then once you've deployed your SAP system, how do you make sure that it's running well?
So Google has this tool called Workload Manager.
Okay.
And Workload Manager is basically designed to help you manage and optimize your SAP workloads on Google Cloud.
Okay.
And one of the things it does is it performs automated validation checks.
Okay.
So it'll, scan your environment and make sure that it's configured correctly.
Right.
It'll look for potential performance bottlenecks.
Right.
And it'll basically help you to make sure that your system is running as efficiently as possible.
Okay.
And they say that Workload Manager uses best practices from SAP, Google Cloud, and OS vendors.
Okay.
So, it's not just Google's opinion.
Right.
They're actually using, industry best practices.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. And then, for organizations that might need a little bit of extra help, what's the story with partners?
So Google really emphasizes the role of partners.
Okay.
They have their own Google Cloud consulting services.
Right.
But they also work with a lot of, trusted partners who have expertise in SAP and Google Cloud.
Yeah.
And these partners can help you with everything from, the initial migration
Right.
to building new cloud-native solutions to ongoing operations and management.
Right. Right. And they specifically mentioned, some global services partners, right?
Yeah, they mentioned Accenture, Atos, Deloitte, and HCL.
Okay. Yeah. So some of the, the big names.
Yeah, the big names. Exactly.
So, and then what about, the more kind of day-to-day stuff?
Yeah.
Like patching, backups, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so a lot of these partners offer managed services.
Okay.
They can handle things like, account and resource administration, OS patching, backup and recovery, SAP basis services.
Right.
So, if you don't want to have to worry about that stuff yourself, you can outsource it to a partner.
Right. Okay, great. And so how do people find those partners?
So you can search for partners on the Google Cloud Partner Directory.
Okay.
And you can filter by, different criteria to find partners who have the specific expertise that you're looking for.
Great. Okay. And then finally, training and education.
Yeah.
What kind of resources are there for people who, maybe they're new to Google Cloud or they want to learn more about running SAP on Google Cloud?
So Google have a lot of general training resources.
Okay.
They have quick starts, they have videos, they have training courses, they have certifications.
Okay.
But they also point out that SAP offers dedicated tutorials for SAP on Google Cloud.
Oh,
And you can find those on the SAP developer website.
okay.
So, if you're really looking to kind of deep dive into the specifics of running SAP on Google Cloud,
Right.
that's a good place to start.
Okay. So if people want to learn more about all of this stuff, where should they go?
So the main page for all of this is the SAP on Google Cloud page, and we'll be sure to include a link to that in the show notes.
Great.
And they also have some service mapping documents.
Okay.
So if you're familiar with AWS or Azure,
Right.
they have documents that map those services to the equivalent Google Cloud services.
Okay, great. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
It seems like Google Cloud has a really compelling story for SAP customers.
I think so, yeah.
They have the infrastructure, they have the flexibility, they have the automation, they have the partnerships,
Yeah.
they have the training.
Yeah.
So, I think it's definitely worth considering if you're thinking about moving your SAP workloads to the cloud.
And I think, just to reiterate, all this information is straight from Google Cloud.
Right.
So, we're not giving you our opinion.
Right.
We're telling you what Google is saying.
Exactly.
And so, I think it's important to go to the source.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do your own research.
Yeah, and I think the links that we've mentioned will be really helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, with all of these different services that Google Cloud offers, and all these different ways of integrating with SAP, it makes me wonder, like, what kind of new possibilities are there?
Yeah.
For our listeners, if you're an SAP expert,
Yeah.